Folklore isteach a chuide chu gagran bhir a sé de dúí beidir an potcréile a tíochtthgah ó prílóir na Hartlanna a ríist gnúsach fi this an cláis na hoscoile bailile á clia. You're very welcome to episode 26 of Folklore Fragments, which thankfully is back in the National Folklore Collection, broadcasting here in our hazmat suits. Hope the apocalypse is treating everybody well. But today we are going to look at aspects of the cultural landscape, say our culture born of nature, the cultural landscape born of the natural landscape, and responses to the natural landscape. And I'm very glad in that regard to have my friend and colleague from the NFC here, Abbe van der Heide. Fáilte Abbe.
Hello, come sorry.
Good bra, that's the event. Today to talk about so nearly 2 years worth of research on seals and folk tradition.
Yeah.
And this is something that you've done for the Irish Seal Sanctuary.
Yeah, so this collaboration was dreamed up before I came into the picture, but it's a collaboration between the Irish Seal Sanctuary, the National Folklore Collection, and the School of Irish Celtic Studies and Folklore, UCD. And
for your own background, like you teach in the School of Irish, don't you teach?
I used to.
And then you did the masters. You were like the prototype masters round for the first of the folklore masters.
Yeah, exactly. The little guinea pigs that came in first.
Happy enough. And so basically there's a huge amount of folk tradition which is really interesting regarding seals, mainly for our own interests as far as like the other world is concerned, and the supernatural and beliefs and customs regarding seals. Absolutely. Which we'll get into. But then it's also kind of timely, because for the second podcast of the series, the Healy Rays feature in episode 6, we're talking about in fairy forts. It was in response to a quote in the by one of the government the TDs here, who was talking about fairy forts. And again, the same TDs has mentioned about the need for a cull of seals in Ireland, which evoked some strong responses and some strange responses. Actually, have a little news piece, which I forget what the website I even took this from, but I'll read this. I don't know if you've seen this, but this is like the Healy Rays requesting that a seal cull be initiated in Ireland, basically to protect fishermen's livelihoods, right? Mm-hmm. And this news piece goes as follows. It says there are up to 10,000 grey seals and around 5,000 harbour seals in Ireland. Calls have been made for a cull of the protected species as fishermen claim they are impacting on their catch. The Irish Wildlife Trust says the issue is low fish stocks, overfishing and the destruction of the marine habitat, not the seals. One culling licence application has been approved this year, and another relating to the Blasket Islands was refused as it's a special area of conservation. 3 more are being considered, so they're going to be slaughtering seals around the Blaskets. Okay. Yeah. Then the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage says it's currently examining a pilot scheme to cull seals using high-powered rifles on boats. This was the line that sent everybody apoplectic. Licenses could be potentially granted in Kerry and Cork for individual problem seals. This is what I was also drinking, like seals sitting on rocks, drinking hands and smoking cigarettes. Individual problem seals to be sniped from afar. Independent Kerry TD Michael Healy Ray says shooting the seals with high-powered rifles from boats is insane. I think we'd agree with him there.
Yes.
Take it your research on seals didn't involve you shooting them with high-powered rifles from boats or from the shore, indeed?
No, absolutely no way at all.
Good.
But no, luckily.
So you've been, for the last 2 years, you've been working on with the Irish Seal Sanctuary to go through all of the archival holdings here in the NFC,
that's it,
relating to seals in tradition.
Yes, exactly. So I've been trawling through all of our archives to find everything, and then the job landed to me to transcribe and then translate a lot of those things, because a lot of them are in Irish.
Yeah,
I would say up to maybe 90%.
Oh, really?
It's a guess, but yeah.
So it's more West Coast distribution than East?
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Right.
And in particular, counties Kerry, Galway, Mayo and Donegal.
I know there's a lot in Kerry, some of the narratives that we'll be looking at. I suppose to start, like, there's a good few articles that we're going to look at and go through, but basically what we aim to do for this episode is to look at the relationship between mankind and the environment, essentially. So this is a subject of debate in the contemporary period with environmentalism and so on, but it has been for quite a while. I'm going to read just a quote here from our colleague, our friend here at the department, Barbara Nealon, in her amazing article in Islanders and Water Dwellers, her article on seals in Irish oral tradition. And in light of this kind of, I suppose, the question around the interaction of say, mankind and the environment, She says, different communities evolve different ways of viewing and of living with their natural surroundings, in accordance with their various needs and value systems. Traditional societies have their own understanding of the order of things, and the beliefs and narratives of such societies offer us an insight into the popular perceptions of the natural world and of mankind's place within the greater scheme. In this context, we might also remember that the discussion between the natural world and the supernatural is often a subjective one, determined largely by culture, which is a very interesting point. That in some instances, there is no supernatural, there is only the natural, which is full of the fantastic, say, or the or different aspects of enchantment or whatever. But we wanted to, I suppose, look at loads of the research that you've trawled through and gathered here from the archive, to look at how do seals feature in popular tradition. What are some of the ideas around them? How do they express themselves in different ways, from the more practical concerns to the more otherworldly concerns? The idea that we'll look at in more detail, I suppose, that seals are, number one, enchanted people or enchanted families. Yeah, it comes up again and again. Or that they're people who can shapeshift and so on. But we'll get through all that in turn. But to start maybe with some of the mundane practicalities before we move into the realms of baseless speculation and conjecture. They were hunted in Ireland, weren't they?
Yes, absolutely. They were very useful, apparently, according to some of our reports. So you could use oil taken from the blubber of seals for stiff joints, sprains, pains in the bones are the most common things, I think, that come up. But apparently also it could be used for burns and even for problems with the lungs. I think a man called Sean McHenry from County Mayo.
Oh, John Henry, yeah. Seamus O'Callaghan did an enormous amount of collections from him, yeah.
Yeah, this isn't a piece from Seamus O'Callaghan, actually. It's an earlier piece, but he says that you can give it to a cow if a cow was coughing as well. So many.
There is a very interesting piece for anyone on YouTube. If you type in, I think it's like Irish language monoglot or some weird title or something, but it's Sean Henry with Seamus on the beach. Yes. Actually, now that I remember, now that you mention it, that was a BBC documentary, and in it, Sean Henry, he was an amazing storyteller, and he's reciting this kind of a run, which is like an item in a narrative, which is this very ornate kind of piece that describes, in this instance, it's like warriors preparing a boat to set sail across the sea, basically. These old traditional formulas that were used in tales. But I remember Seamus saying that when they were there recording that, there was some huge commotion in the sea or something behind them, and they turned around and a seal came out of the water onto the beach. You don't see this seal looming behind them in the clip. But John Henry, Carrew Haig, Carrew na Gluch and Northwest Mayo, an amazing side of the world, really remote and beautiful place.
Absolutely.
So it was they were harvesting fur, oil, blubber, and giving it to animals. Yes. What was it if the cow was ill?
So if Egbo a Cossacht or
right?
Yeah, if she had a cough.
That's pleasant. And then seal meat as well, like there's
so seal meat, I find that some of the accounts are quite split. Some say seal meat was only eaten in desperate times, whereas others seem to have actually relished the idea of seal meat, particularly as far as I'm aware, the Blasket Islanders.
They were blashing it.
Yeah, they were big fans. If anybody's familiar with Lara Hidlacoch by Peg Sayers, there's a piece in there where she compares seal meat to pork. I think she says it was lovely.
Peg, good woman. There's a lot of one of the other practicalities regarding them, that they've long been held as the fisherman's enemy.
Yes,
and this is what ties into even the idea like that now there are calls for seals to be culled or whatever at the moment, but that they used to often steal the catch from fishermen as they were out kind of they would compete with them, and as if by magic here we have a piece from the Sound Archive. This is from the Urban Folklore Project. So this was recorded in Dublin in 1980, and in it, this is Lyrics Murphy. You've heard this piece before?
Yes, I have, yeah.
He's talking about salmon fishing, and he's describing the only time he ever ate salmon in all his days, because he couldn't afford to, because it was so expensive. He had to sell it when you catch it. But it was when a seal maimed it, basically, and so he couldn't sell this salmon. He ate it. But he talks about how smart they are and how they outwit the fishermen and steal their catch. So this is Lyrics Murphy.
And I've slaughtered thousands of salmon, not exaggerating, and I only ate salmon once in my life, fresh salmon. Would you believe that?
Why, did you not afford to eat it?
You couldn't afford it, and the reason for that was the seal was after taking a lump out of him.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
And
Did you have troubles with seals?
Oh Lord, I've seen the seal taking 2 salmon almost down my hand one night. He was after them, he must have been chasing them. Or maybe there was 2 seals, but as soon as he hit the net, he took it. I was going for the salmon and he took the blinking net and all down to the bottom of me.
Where, was this far up the river or was it in the estuary?
That was in the pond, Alexander Basin. That happened to me. I went over to see the seal at me net, chopping hell's gates out of it. He chops the head off first, so that the back end will drop out. And when the back end the back end of the salmon drops, he's down after he has it. Very cute.
Very clever.
Oh, they're clever, yeah.
And what seal was that? Was it the grey seal or the black seal?
Ah, the common grey seal.
Grey seal?
Yeah, they're very numerous around there. They come from Lambay Island and around the Bailey Lighthouse from the caves, you know.
And is there any name for him other than the seal?
Well, in Ringsend we call it the sail.
The sail?
The sail, yeah. The old sail took one on me last night. He always left a trademark. And he'd damage your net too, maybe. Smash a few maces of your net. I think he had his belly full that night. He was not been working good though. And there was a big lump out of the salmon anyway. So you couldn't put it on the market. So we cut it up and ate it. It was the only time I remember ever eating salmon.
So Lyrics Murphy from Ringsend, they're talking about the seal or the sail stealing salmon. So I'm happy to brush the practicalities aside.
Okay.
And race headlong into the world of baseless speculation. No, it's worth. I suppose it's worth noting like the practical uses. So like you mentioned, oil and the fat and meat and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But to focus really, what I'd like to do, I suppose, is to focus on seals and the supernatural, or seals and the otherworldly, and because they've been such an integral part of kind of coastal life for so many generations, it's no surprise really that there's so many different customs and traditions and narratives that exist around them. The other thing that's worth noting around seals is that they're liminal creatures. They're
Mm-hmm.
beings of kind of land and water, and they don't fully belong to either element. So there's a certain ambiguity around them, and that I suppose attracts a lot of beliefs and otherworldly associations in folk tradition to the liminal in general. And it's also worth noting as well that the type of material that we're going to look at here, as we see in all these different episodes, we have to frame it not just in a local context but in an international context as well, because a lot of the customs that you see around seals and beliefs regarding them, although they're part and parcel of kind of coastal life in Ireland, you find them in the Baltic regions,
Mm-hmm.
in the Nordic cultures, up in Scotland, Iceland, the Orkneys, the Faroes and so on. So there's a really wide spread distribution for these customs and beliefs. And an international element basically. So there's a piece I want to read here on the seal in the folklore of Northern Europe, to basically, before we get into it, just to look at the international background to this kind of corpus of beliefs basically. And in this, Martin Pouville is the author, and he writes, "A large varied body of traditions ascribes human origin to the seal. On the German Baltic island of Rügen, the animal has been believed to be descended from drowned human beings." We've more on that anon. Concerning the same tradition in the Orkneys, it was reported late in the last century that the belief that drowned people turn into seals is since a generation extinct. So there's, I suppose, the general idea that we see here is that there's, like I said, there's this kind of international component to it. Similarly, then, apart from the reference above, he goes on to note the same beliefs in Iceland, and he says, "It is a little surprising that the common man in Iceland to some extent despises the breed of seals, and yet at the same time in some measure honours them. A fable or tradition devotes special attention to the breed of seals, regarding it as a kind of human race called Merfolk, living on the sea floor and possessing human shape under the familiar external seal hide. This hide they are said to discard occasionally when in fine weather they want to walk on the beach. Their women are said to have been caught and taken as wives." So this is something that we're going to see.
Yes,
we're going to see again and again. So there's a few things that are being touched on internationally there. First of all, the idea that that seals are actually enchanted humans, and that's something that you see time and again.
It's almost an umbrella framework to a lot of the folk legends and even some of the anecdotes that we see, this kind of idea that seals are related to humans in some way.
And why was that, do you think? What was the
I presume
the reasoning behind it or whatever?
I think that, I mean, we're very vain as people. We see ourselves in so many
Project
things.
ourselves into the world around us.
And so seals, not only do they kind of have these big eyes and whiskers and very human-like kind of faces, but also people comment again and again on so many habits that they perceive as human. For instance, maybe I'll read, there's a short account here. It's actually from a diary of one of our full-time collectors, cool. Michael J. Murphy.
Yep.
And he's been collecting in Ballintoy in County Antrim. And he comments on the fact that he hasn't gotten all that much about seal lore from Hugh O'Rourke, the informant he's collecting from, but that Hugh O'Rourke added at the end, he says, every night that ever shines, there's a seal that comes into that big hole. And he points out towards the sea, and he says, and it washes itself. We can hear the water splashing. Now, wouldn't you wonder at an odd thing like that? You'd think he was clean enough in the sea all day without having to come to the big hole to wash himself. That's
funny. You do see that time and again. There's all these like anecdotes ascribing human kind of behaviours. Did you read the one about there's the fisherman who sees two young seals fighting on some rocks?
Yes.
And then this other large mother seal comes and kind of slaps them in the head and breaks them up.
Exactly.
And then sends them away.
Tells them to
and then the fishermen are kind of remarking on the idea, I suppose, that they're like human behaviours, basically, that I suppose that like explain their existence in another way.
Exactly.
Or references to the fact that they have 5 fingers and they're flippers, that it's like a hand or whatever.
And of course that worked the other way, because you could also have people that would have a slight webbing between the fingers and the toes.
And that explained that they were like the seal people.
Exactly.
We have a look at that, the different families.
Yeah.
There's a quote around this from Barbara and the Lynn, because you have to look at, there's like a certain sympathetic attitude to them, even if, like the way Lyrics Murphy's describing, not even an ambivalent attitude, but quite a negative attitude, because you're kind of competing with them. But Barbara writes that supernatural beliefs regarding seals could be said to exist for a number of different reasons, operating at various levels and in different ways, with each acting as a reinforcement to the whole. These reasons range from the psychological to the geographical to the etiological, and can each be seen as contributory factors to the richness of the overall body of belief. Which is a great point to bear out, to see that there's a whole landscape, a corpus of belief that links into the natural landscape, to how that landscape came to exist, whatever, that it tries to explain it in practical terms, and then in these, I suppose, in another worldly way as well. There's a reference in that the article by Martin Poole about drowned people and seals, and that's something that we see in the north of Ireland.
Yes, it's something that I haven't come across it all that often, apart from in connection with Rathlin Island, or even just on the mainland.
Rathlin Island is off the Antrim coast, off the coast of Ballycastle in Northern Ireland, just within striking distance of Scotland.
Pretty much, exactly. So, yeah, I've come across one or two references that say that the dead come back as seals, particularly as fishermen that have been drowned. And maybe I'll read a quick extract that Linda Ballard has included in her article.
It's a lovely article,
it is a wonderful article. It's on seal belief in or on Rathlin Island. And she has a quote from a storyteller who says, it's said that the dead used to come back, and especially fishermen used to come back as seals. Depending on what kind of life you led, you would come back as a seal or as a bird. It wasn't so good to come back as a seal, but I think better to come back as a seagull. But
she has another reference, isn't she, about like this idea, and also it's interesting for us as well to see like just questions or say customs or beliefs regarding reincarnation that are just really quite popular at times in tradition. You find many accounts of, remember like Oni Power talking about traveller women coming back as skulled crows or grey ponies and things like this. So it's popular, but it's interesting just sitting alongside Christianity or Catholic or Christian tradition or different branches of Christian tradition in this country, that you have this at times a kind of offhand references, whatever, to ideas of reincarnation and coming back in different guises or whatever as well. This whole notion. But Linda May Ballard, her article, she mentions as well this idea of like trying to account for the existence of seals, and she talks about the rebellion in heaven, which is a common idea that ascribes that tries to explain the existence of the fairies and other enchanted or otherworldly spirits on earth. It was like an attempt to kind of fit them into a Christian theological framework. So Linda May writes, she says, well, I heard a yarn. It's the time of the rebellion in heaven, and they were cast out, and some fell on the land and some fell on the sea, and the seal, he's the one that fell in the sea. So to explain, there's the idea that, this is something we posted online the other day, that there was a rebellion in heaven, that Lucifer either goes into a room that God had and looks on the mirror of glory, or sits on the chair of glory that's kind of set up for the creator, and then God gets very annoyed, casts Lucifer out and casts out all of the angels that were siding with him. And then somebody, you'd think who, says to God, stop now. And so God relents and leaves those angels that were in the air, those are on the land, and in the sea, or in the sea. They stopped wherever they were, basically. And so this attempts to explain, I suppose, not just the world of the fairies or the world of the liminal dead, whatever, but in the sea, that seals in particular are these essentially fallen angels that have been kind of trapped in the ocean, basically.
Exactly.
So there's like another world, liminal kind of community that are existing alongside us. But again and again, this is the same common thing that we see, right? That they're enchanted. They're not ordinary creatures.
No, exactly. They sit somewhere between animal and human, and then somewhere in the supernatural as well. The
nice thing about Barbara's article on seals and tradition, and as far as narrative is concerned, like you mentioned earlier on there, the human characteristics ascribed, like the seal that comes to wash itself, or the seal that the fisherman sees breaking up a fight among ewes, whatever. That from the perspective of our literature and narrative, that there are small anecdotal accounts, brief accounts regarding seals and their behaviour that suggest them as these other world creatures, but that goes from anecdotes all the way up to these really formulaic legends that are in migratory legends, international legends, whatever, of which there are a few kind of different types or main groupings that we'll look at. So there's a whole corpus of belief, from kind of snatches of remarks and belief statements by fishermen or by local communities, up to these migratory legends that spread from country to country, but they all emphasize the same thing.
Exactly. They work almost on a sliding scale, I like to think.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. So those are some of the kind of, I suppose, the anecdotal little accounts that you find. But then it's worth looking at, I suppose, moving up that sliding scale that you mentioned. A lot of the legends focus on the idea of transformation. And we have, that's really common in Irish tradition, the idea that in particular women could transform themselves, like all over the Midlands or all over Ireland really. You have the idea of the woman who changes herself into a hare to steal her neighbour's profit, or kind of particularly suckle the cattle and steal all the milk and so on.
Exactly.
And then there's a similar version of that legend called the wounded seal that we have in this country as well, right?
Yeah.
What happens with that?
So the wounded seal, it's very similar to the hare, really. What happens is that a fisherman might injure a seal. It might even be a group of fishermen, and then suddenly they find themselves either in the midst of a storm or very unruly weather, and maybe they might wash into an unknown place they've never heard of before or never seen before, where they'll meet this person who will say, actually, when you were injured that seal before, that was actually me.
That was me.
Would you mind not doing that again, please?
Yeah. This is the common thing. Like, there's a good one. There's an example here from our archives, a translation of it here. And it says, long ago it appears there came a time when the fish were very plentiful off the Irish coast here. They were so plentiful that they were being washed up on the strand, and at the same time there were no fish at all to be caught off the coast of Scotland or England. This enraged the Scottish people so much that their wise women turned themselves into seals and came over to the Irish coast to drive away the fish. Happens all the time. There were a couple of men in the district who used to go around the place with forks gathering sea wrack in the springtime. This is a kind of common thing. Seaweed was used as fertilizer, whatever, so people would go into the sea and harvest it. What should happen, only that these seals were in among the submerged rocks at the water's edge underneath the seaweed. One of these men struck the fork down through the seaweed, as he thought himself, and what did he do? Only stick it into the eye of one of the seals, and away goes the seal with the fork stuck in him. A few years after that, these men were themselves fishing over off the coast of Scotland. They had boats that time which were something like the curragh we see on the shore today, except they were made of boards on the inside and hareskin on the outside. They used to rub fish oil on it so that it would last and then it wouldn't let the water in. Well, one of these boats was fishing off the coast of Scotland, like I said, and one evening, when they were lying in the harbour, a couple of the men went off through the countryside for a bit of a walk. When they were going past the door of this house, what did one of them see? Only the fork he had lost on the strand a couple of years before that. He was more than surprised, and he thought to himself that he would go inside and find out how his fork had got to this place. When he put his head inside the door, there was an old woman sitting in the chimney corner with a piece of cloth wrapped round her eye. He took hold of the fork in his hand and he said, "Where did you get this fork?" "It doesn't make much difference," said the old woman, "and in any case, what do you know about it?" "Well," he said, "it's like one I lost long ago beyond in Ireland, one that I got stuck in a seal." "Oh, damnation," she said, taking a pot of steaming water off the fire and making a go for him. "It was you that stuck the fork in me and left me sitting here since with my eye nearly hanging out." The man took to his heels as fast as he could, and he was glad that he did get away. They fled away a couple of days after that, and I'm telling you, he wasn't seen around the coast of Scotland from that day to the day he died, no doubt.
No,
so this is the kind of the story that you see of the idea of transformation, basically, that this animal isn't an animal, it's actually someone who's taken this shape.
The form of a seal, yeah. Exactly.
Do we have any other versions of that? Have you come across in your own research that you found any other?
I really like this version it's from the school's collection. So it was collected sometime around 1937-38.
I found one account, I don't know, is this the same one?
It might be the same one. It's one of the only ones in English, I think, a very complete one. But I love how it starts and ends. So this one says, years ago, seals were very plentiful around Rossbeg. This is in County Donegal, Rossbeg, County Donegal. And the fish were getting so scarce that the fishermen resolved to kill all the seals they could lay their hands on. One particular day, they killed 7 very large seals, but the 8th escaped with a large spear stuck in its side. The fishermen carried on fishing, as usual that day, but in the evening, a dreadful storm rose, and they were giving up all hope when they sighted a small island which they'd never seen before. So the story continues in a similar fashion to the one you just read, where they walk in and they find that this man welcomes them, and his son is in terrible pain because of the being wounded by the spear. Yeah, the spear stuck in him. And again, the fisherman does. In this case, the fisherman is more kindly, and he takes out the spear, and the seal is then healed. But I love the way it ends then, because it says that the storm settled down and the men got safely home, but before leaving had to promise the old island man that they would never again kill a seal. This promise they strictly kept, and since then a seal has never been killed on the Rossbeg shore, with the result that seals are more numerous on that coast than any other coast in Ireland. Fish were also very plentiful around these parts, and the old fisherman says that it's all due to their protection of the seals.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they do a full 180.
Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And that's from Donegal.
Yes.
I like this other account. So this is obviously a Donegal, a narrative specifically attached to found, collected in Donegal in particular.
There are versions. I have versions from Galway and Donegal, but it doesn't seem to travel too much further south. Which is really interesting.
There's a small version of one which I got from the school's collection from Mayo. So maybe it goes that far and kind of no further. Basically, it's just a brief account. It's not as nice as the one you have there. It says, one time a man was walking along the seashore and he seen a seal swimming out from the land. He took a stone and fired it at the seal and knocked out its eye. A couple of years afterwards, he was going along and he was going astray. He seen a light in a small old house and he made for the light. He went into it and there was no one in it but an old man with one eye. As soon as he went inside, the old man knew him. Do you remember the day you knocked out my eye? I have 3 sons, and if they were here, you'd not go home safe. Be going now, and you can say to yourself that you're very lucky, said the old man to him. So this is the same idea. But there's more of a kind of, what would you say, it's like, I suppose an idea that like, to treat the land or the natural landscape or the animals in it where it's inhabited with respect, that you will likewise, your life will be fruitful and bountiful. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And a lot of these narratives focus around the idea that someone is about to hit a seal, or that's the next one we'll look at, where they're about to do a seal in, and it says, "No, don't hit me,"
Yes.
or something.
Yes.
And then they never do again.
Never again, and then it's lesson learnt at that point.
So there's a kind of there's like a kind of allegorical aspect to these, where they're suggesting ideal modes of behaviour, say, for fishermen in the natural landscape, whatever. Also, that one that you read there is interesting because it has a comparison with the knife against the wave.
Yes.
There's an element of that found in that, even the storm rising up and chasing them, and then having to remove this thing.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So there's a crossover. There's like this hybrid of different narratives that's appearing between Legends of Transformation and the knife against the wave. Which, do you want to explain the knife against the wave to people?
Yeah, I can do.
It doesn't really relate to seals.
It can actually. There's one, if you look at some work done by Michal Ross, he actually went through and he identified a couple of versions that I think he calls seal redactions.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
I
the
think
widow's son redaction and seal. He has different ones.
He has different. He kind of has split them up into different via their different motifs, whatever motifs come up. But he has a couple about seals, and I think that I found more than when looking through all the seal material. And then, so yeah, you have this kind of split where some versions, they have an implement like you would in the knife against the wave, so the knife against the wave is a maritime story where fishermen are out on a boat and they're kind of nearly swamped by one wave, and then a second, and then the third wave. The fisherman or even his son throws sometimes a black handled knife, splits the wave, and they're saved. They're not drowned because of this. But then later on, the man who threw the knife is called away to another land maybe, and he's told that he must take the knife from sometimes the eye or the head or chest
from stabbed his daughter, basically.
Exactly. Yes. So he has to kind of, and it has to be him, which is we also saw this in the version that I read out. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but it had to be the person who injured, who cast the knife, or who injured to heal. So in that sense, it's very similar to
strange, these kind of crossovers that people draw on and use. That's a lovely version. I haven't seen that.
It's one of my favourite. I always keep it at hand. You never know when it's useful.
So the wounded seal is the first of the narrative types that we come across. But there aren't too many versions of it. It's quite rare. Is that fair to say?
When you really dig through and you look through some versions that may have been categorized elsewhere, that's sometimes the problem with categorization, but I think I had just under 20.
Oh wow, that's way more than I thought.
More than there's, I think that's what kind of come about.
Oh, that's amazing.
The work that I did.
I didn't know there was that many at all.
More than maybe originally thought, but
that's really interesting. I had no idea that there was that many. For say the next type to look at the second narrative type concerns a seal who speaks.
I love this one.
It is lovely. It's imaginatively titled "The Seal Who Speaks." And the basic premise for this is that there's a seal who's about to be killed by a seal hunter, that they have their arm raised to strike them, or hit them below with an oar, or spear them, or generally skewer, maim them, or shoot them with a rifle from a boat. And they are suddenly kind of not reprimanded, but the seal pleads with them.
Yes.
And it's like they'll know the fisherman's name, and they'll say, "Don't shoot at me," or sometimes say, "Hey, we're from the same family," or something like this, right? So they'll know who the fisherman is, but the seal will speak, and generally then scare the living daylights out of the fisherman, who doesn't kill them.
I mean, who can blame him for being fairly surprised?
This is true, unless you're having a psychotic break and hallucinating. So there's an example here. This is collected in Rathlin Island again, to go to Rathlin. A lot of these are around the north, so that kind of connection with Scotland. But it says here, this account: "The old men certainly didn't like you to meddle with the seal, although I shot too," this guy puts in his note. "I heard my grandfather tell a story about them, certainly. He said that like now, the seals were becoming very plentiful and going for all the fish, and they went out with a gun in the boat, And this old seal come up, and when he lifted the gun, this man, the seal lifted his paw and he says, Donald, don't fire at me. It was in Irish, but it meant that. They said that was true enough that time. This is really common. This kind of, and there are examples of a guy coming upon a seal with like a litter of pups.
Yes.
He goes to kill her, but doesn't.
And then she says, "No, I wait till I'm finished looking after my children."
Did you find many other versions of that in the research you were doing?
Yes, there are quite a few, and this one's quite popular, I think, all around the West Coast. You find versions most places, but I wanted to just draw your attention to this one because I think it's really interesting. This one is from a man named Bartley McDonagh. In this version, actually, the seal hunter doesn't listen. So when the seal, it's actually a baby seal who cries out this time. He says, "No, bhfuil mé a Pachin." So don't hit me, Pachin. But actually, the seal hunter doesn't listen, and he does unfortunately kill the young seal. But what happens later is amazing. The mother seal is then kind of crying and shouting whenever she sees this particular seal hunter come to sea. And how does it ends with, when he couldn't get out of the way in time, she grabbed him, she took him into her mouth, into the sea, and his hands were in the air and he was shouting, and nothing could be done to save him.
This is the man who...
This is the man who killed this poor mother seal's baby seal.
He experienced swift and violent retribution.
Yes, exactly. Dragged into the sea and drowned.
Kicking and screaming. Nice. He died doing what he loved best. There are other kind of accounts, this idea like the seal who speaks. There's a reference here that, these animals are at times regarded as supernatural. And there's a circumstantial tale of a wounded seal crying to the assailant, "Spare your old grandfather, Darby O'Dowd," right? So that the fisherman is kind of, I suppose that they're suddenly faced with the idea that like all is not as it seems, and actually this kind of creature is really a human. The other thing, the important thing, that Barbara notes is that the sometimes there are examples of narratives where the seal is maybe brought back to a house. Did you see many of those?
Yes.
Somebody finds one.
Yeah, exactly. Often, sometimes they have names.
But this is the important thing about it, is that like, say somebody finds like a seal pup, brings it home, and then that night they'll hear a kind of tumult outside the house, and somebody was saying, Tig, where are you? Tig. And it's often in Munster, apparently the name Tig was quite common for seals.
Exactly.
And Barbara notes then the importance of the idea that these animals having a Christian name.
Yes. And
that they are named specifically that has this I suppose a human quality or human element to them, or something that we'd associate within the spiritual bounds of the community, basically, that they're not nameless animals, that they have specific names or whatever. But that's a common idea that somebody then comes and tries to get them, basically.
Yes, and they have to swiftly drop them back.
There's a piece here, and it describes, this is collected from County Cork, and it says one time a man caught a seal in the sea beside Trá Ligach. He brought the seal home with him, and he was alive. He put the seal into the kitchen. That night there was a man going across the strand, and he heard a voice speaking, "Achonach achon, achonach achon." The man continued on his way, and he went into a house on the other side of the strand. It was in this house that the seal was, and the man told his story to the man of the house. As soon as the seal heard the words "achonach achon," he spoke. That was Tig looking for me. They let the seal go, and they didn't hear that voice from that on.
Yeah.
Do you have any other versions of that you came across at all?
I have. Well, what I think is interesting also is not only are they named, but the sense of community is always really clear.
That they stick up for each other and come after each other and don't. Yeah.
Exactly, and I've come across certain versions where it's we're told that it's a mother looking for her pup. I've come across a version where they're brothers. Tig and Donagh are brothers. I don't have the reference on me, but I'm certain there's one account where it's actually a group of seals. So the house ends up almost surrounded.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
The house is surrounded by a group of seals that are all calling out for this little seal that's it's kept in the kitchen.
There's an audio account I want to play here. That talks about this, the idea of like "na búil" was something off. It's like don't hit me, don't shoot me, or whatever, this sort of thing. But this is an account collected in America in Holyoke in Massachusetts in 1982 by Seamus O'Cahan and Leo Corduff. They went over there to do these recordings of people who left Ireland, specifically who left the area I think that John Henry was from. We mentioned John Henry earlier, around Northwest Mayo. And they did these amazing recordings. But in this account, Seamus is talking to this man who's describing how the O'Cahan family were thought to be an enchanted family attached to seals, the O'Kane family in English basically, that they were somehow derived from a union between a mortal and a seal. And so this man talks about that, how he doesn't really like it.
Yeah, his name is John Kane, isn't it?
Okay, yeah. But he describes his mother had a song or something.
Yes. She had a song about how as somebody is about to
bludgeon is the word you're looking for.
Kindly
dispatch.
Kindly dispatch this seal. When the seal actually talks to her and says, "Oh,
don't hit me.
You must be aware."
Cease and desist. Refrain. Okay, so this is
John Keane.
John Keane. Okay.
John Kane.
I'm not going to say a word. But I'd like to get at the bottom of that, but I don't think I ever will.
Did you ever hear stories about seals not being killed or not being...
oh, no, you weren't supposed to touch them. No way, back in Norway, no.
Did people kill them?
They didn't kill them, no. No, they didn't. There was loads of them back in our place, and you were not supposed to hurt them or kill them. I don't know why.
Did you ever hear stories about a seal that spoke? A man was going to hit it and the seal said, "Na boy,
yes, I did. Na
boy,
Vic or something like that. I heard that too. But we heard those stories when we were little children, see. And now if you hadn't mentioned that, it would never come to me again.
Would they, I mean, the people who had said that the people who would say that now, would you answer them back, or would you get annoyed with them, or what?
I used to get annoyed. And little fella, I used to hear those stories.
Yeah.
And there was a story about a girl from Innisquee who found a young seal on the rocks, and there was a song about that, and my mother had a song in Gaelic. And she was going to take him home, to have him for a pet, this girl from Innisquee, but the roan, or the seal, talked to her. And he told her if she did, she would never go to heaven. He had to go back again to the sea and so forth. Those stories they made up,
There was a song about that?
Yes, there was. And I had a few words of it.
Was it a nice
I never
song?
learned it.
Nice air?
It was a nice air, and it was a bit tragic. It was like a tragedy song. Una Chalin Cebni Danam. The girl's name was Una. Cebni Danam. Najin Armsa. Something bad, whatever it was. That's all I know about it. But it was a good old Gaelic song. My mother used to sing it a lot. My mother was a beautiful singer.
When would she sing that, John? I mean, what sort of occasions would you hear her
well,
sing a song like
say at night time, we'd be around. Everybody was in, collected in winter time. At the fireside. First we had to say the rosary. No doubt about that. The rosary had to be said.
In Irish or English?
In Irish. And I've missed some of that too. Because I haven't spoken 4 words in Gaelic in 54 years. See? And as I said before, all the Gaelic I got was mostly from my grandparents.
That's such an amazing little piece. It just shows he brings out so much in less than 3 minutes about like the social context, the setting within which narratives were recited. Like you mentioned, winter time. Mm-hmm. That's the common thing, kind of that stories were told in the winter, whatever, the winter season. Sitting around the fire, the rosary being recited first.
Yes, yeah.
And then Seamus is just amazing, kind of light touch way of collecting this. Just grabs so much with the little details about, was it in Irish, was it in English, and prompting him in a way. This is something that you see in the handbook as well, or in these collections, and it reiterates the fact from the point of view of the collector that the more you know about a topic that you go to collect on, the better it is, because you can then, as Seamus does to John here in this piece, you can use these little prompts that that you don't necessarily remember from your own youth, but you know that they exist in tradition.
Exactly.
And that they'll then trigger, like he says, oh my God, oh yeah, I do remember that. And then he even has words from the song and different bits and pieces that he wouldn't have remembered at all, except for these prompts that the folklore collector has, because if you have an overview or knowledge of tradition there, then you can keep these things in your back pocket or whatever. But it's such a lovely little piece, and I love his the sound of his voice, the accent as well, where you have this, you can see there's this American accent coming through, but then there's still this Mayo, and and then the Irish is coming back to him.
Yeah, exactly, as he's
it's all lovely.
talking about. But
you were saying that probably I was playing, you were telling me that you found a few versions of that song.
A couple of versions, and they're all
in manuscripts or in the sound record.
In the all in the manuscript collection from here, and all from County Mayo.
Amazing.
What I find really interesting is that none of the versions really sound very similar.
The words,
or the words aren't very similar. So I had a really difficult job trying to actually get some meaning out of it sometimes. The beginning of his is really quite clear. A Colleen Coneelys Anam, like
Queen, remember your soul.
Be aware of your soul. You know
that you're not going to go to heaven if you keep me here, or whatever.
Exactly.
It's funny, even that idea, like we mentioned, Linda May Ballard's article where she talks about the idea of the rebellion in heaven, and that the seals are part of this liminal race, for want of a better word, who exists between heaven and hell, waiting for the judgment day. That was the thing he said about the fairies as well, that they can't get into heaven. There's kind of this, and then also the idea that the seal has to return to the sea, that they have to go. You have to go back. Basically, is the thing, and so that's something that we find really commonly. I suppose we'll talk about in the next account or next legend. Is it worth mentioning something? Excuse me. At the start, where he talks about the fact that certain families were considered to be enchanted.
Yeah, and I was so interested to find that he wasn't very proud of this.
He didn't like it. Yeah,
he wasn't a fan. Because that is something that you do see sometimes, is that it can be almost kind of used as an insult.
An insult against people.
In certain contexts. I don't think it was always felt to be that way, but for certain people, yes, it's.
So there were certain families were basically believed to be the result of a union between a mortal and an enchanted seal.
Exactly. And it comes from several different areas. We'll come back to maybe one of them later on. But maybe I'll read the more common names. So here we're talking about Keen or Cain, which is O'Cahan in Irish. But here there's more accounts about the family, the Coneelys family, or O'Coneela. Or Mac Coneela.
They were really commonly associated with seals.
With seals, exactly, particularly around the Connemara area. So this, I'll read out a little bit by a full-time folklore collector, Liam McCushla, who's answering a questionnaire actually, who was sent out in 1939. I think it was sent out to help David Thompson prepare for a BBC programme, as far as I know.
David Thompson?
David Thompson is a writer and a producer, or was a writer and producer, and he had a long time interest in seals. His book is called The People of the Sea.
Looks amazing. I've never seen this.
No, it's a really good read. He clearly had a wonderful memory and was very observant. But was he Irish or? No, he's English, but he spent quite a lot of his childhood in Scotland, which is where he kind of discovered this idea that seals, could be people enchanted or could be related to people in some way. And then he follows, the book follows his journey trying to find more about this, because he does then come to Ireland. He meets Seamus O'Delarga, who points him towards Kerry, and then later he goes to Mayo as well, and he touches on, there's so many things that we've touched on.
I've never even
in the book. I think there's very similar stories to what we've touched on. It's great. It's a really wonderful read.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the description in the SoundCloud to this. I'll have to get a copy of this
too. Yeah, we have copies in the library as well.
Cool. So sorry, this is the idea that where we're about families in particular.
Yes.
So you mentioned the Coneelys in
Connemara.
In Connemara. And Liam
Yeah.
McCushla in this questionnaire in 1939, which was being prepared for this guy David Thompson for his research, is it?
I think so. And
What's the questionnaire on? What's our...
it was on seals, and as far as
Right.
I know, it wasn't sent. It's not a very big questionnaire, so
Yeah.
and all of the responses, I'm nearly certain, are all from full-time collectors. There might be one or two others, but I think it was only sent to full-time collectors, which
Yeah.
did happen. So here, Liam McCushla is he gives a wonderful summary on a lot of the things we've just touched on.
Mhm.
So he says, and it was originally in Irish, but I'll read the translation. So stories about seals are very common in every coastal place I've ever visited. And he refers here to counties Mayo, Galway and Clare particularly. So the storytellers from all these places tell me that what they heard was that seals were people under an enchantment, and according to many of them, they should not be interfered with for that reason. In Connemara, the Coneelys family is associated with seals, but I've never found any accounts of other groups associated with them anywhere else. We do know there are other families, but Liam McCushla was not aware of that. It is said that you can sometimes hear seals talking together as if they were people, and when one dies or is killed, the others lament it. Yeah, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
piece there at the end, such like back to what we were saying earlier about
The
the really
human
behaviour.
They were referred to in some of the accounts in the manuscripts as Christi,
Yes,
that they're a
exactly.
Christian, that they're Christians who are under a spell, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and other families,
Other families that come up are
Coneelys, O'Cahans.
Migratory in the north, as far as I know. I actually had a lovely friend tell me recently when she heard I was doing this research. She said, "Oh yes." Somebody I used to know used to point at the seals, be like, "Oh, that's my family."
That's gas. That's
yeah,
amazing.
it's wonderful. And I think also O'Duda, which is O'Dowd,
Yeah,
and then O'Shea, which
This
are
is
also
true.
connected to the Mermaid, but they come up in
This
terms of
is
seals as
the
well.
case. Where I felt, yeah, you're right. Sorry, here's another of it. O'Duda, O'Cahan, O'Conneilla, O'Shea, as you said there. O'Hara's, Coneelys, Keens, O'Hara's in Sligo, Gallaghers in Donegal.
Oh, makes sense. O'Flanagan I've seen somewhere as well.
There was a reference as well to people in Mullen that if a seal was killed, the inhabitants of the town would suffer nosebleeds.
Oh,
That there's like a sympathetic
I'll
kind
come
of
across
effect
that.
that
That's
they'd be injured, whatever. But the idea, I suppose, of you have these references, I suppose, to naming, to the kind of the seal as a Christi, right, as a Christian under a spell, that they're people, they mourn their dead, and that these other seals come to the house looking for them, knocking on the door, saying, "Come on, Taig and Donnacha, like they have to come home," or whatever. And that has a certain resonance. Like Barbara draws parallels in her article with a couple of other popular narratives, The King of the Cats,
Yes.
and or The Fairy Hill is on Fire,
Yeah.
which are pointed back to the origins of the Pan legend.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic, I suppose, idea of The King of the Cats is a brief kind of synopsis. A man is out walking at night. He meets a weird cat that says, "When you go home, tell your cats that the King of the Cats is dead."
Yes.
Or tell your wife the King of the Cats is dead. I don't think it says address the cat specifically, but this cat speaks to him. So he naturally goes home and he says to his wife, "The weirdest thing happened. I met this giant weird cat out at night at a
And she
crossroads,
says,
and
"Darling, have you been on the drink
you're
again?"
hallucinating again, darling." And the cat said to me, "The King of the Cats is dead." At which point, their own cat in the house springs up and is like, good grief, and runs out the door.
Yes.
This is a very, very common legend. The King of the Cats is dead. Another kind of variant, or say a connected maybe version of that, if not quite a variant of it, is, or where that same motif appears, at least in a different legend, is told in connection with the fairies. The idea of the fairy hill is on fire. And this is often used in the context of the changeling, the idea of a child who's been stolen and replaced with this wizened old kind of creature where your own darling baby used to be, or whatever, and now you have to somehow get rid of this thing. And after all these different attempts, which fail, it's revealed that somebody comes in, knows that this changeling is in fact a fairy, it's not a mortal baby, and says the fairy hill is on fire. At which point the changeling gets up and exclaims, "Oh my God," and runs off.
Yes.
And then, you know, the other child is kind of thrown back and is returned.
Replaced, yes.
And interesting, like this is apparently the earlier kind of versions of this are found in the Pan legend, and so-called Pan legend of classical literature. So you have the same motif. So I'll read out just an account for people as well, to just because it's worth tracing you know, these ideas, we're talking about transformation legends and legend ideas around the other world and the natural landscape that stretch from Ireland up to Iceland and the Baltic regions, Germanic regions, Nordic regions, Celtic regions, and then into Greek and Latin classical literature as well. This is the Pan legend. It's just a kind of a synopsis of it. This describes basically an account where somebody is told on a boat to say that Pan, the god Pan, has died, basically. So it says here, the father of Aemilianus, the orator, to whom some of you have listened, was Epitherses, who lived in our town and was my teacher in grammar. He said that once upon a time, in making a voyage to Italy, he embarked on a ship carrying freight and many passengers. It was already evening when, near the Akinades Islands, the wind dropped and the ship drifted near Paxi. Almost everybody was awake, and a good many had not finished their after-dinner wine. Nice. Suddenly, from the island of Paxi was heard the voice of someone loudly calling Thamus, so that all were amazed. Thamus was an Egyptian pilot, not known by name even to many on board. Twice he was called and made no reply, but the third time he answered, and the caller, raising his voice, said, "When you come opposite Pylades, announce that great Pan is dead." On hearing this, all, said Epitherses, were astounded and reasoned among themselves whether it were better to carry out the order, or to refuse to meddle and let the matter go. Under the circumstances, Thamus made up his mind that if there should be a breeze, he would sail past and keep quiet, but with no wind and a smooth sea about the place, he would announce what he had heard. So when he came opposite Pylades, and there was neither wind nor wave, Thamus from the stern, looking toward the land, said the words as he had heard them, "Great Pan is dead." Even before he had finished, there was a great cry of lamentation, not of one person, but of many, mingled with exclamations of amazement. As many persons were on the vessel, the story was soon spread abroad in Rome, and Thamus was sent for by Tiberius Caesar. Tiberius became so convinced of the truth of the story that he caused an inquiry and investigation to be made about Pan, and the scholars, who were numerous at his court, conjectured that he was the son born of Hermes and Penelope. Amazing account from classical literature of this, I suppose, the motif that you find condensed then into very localized narratives regarding these other world communities, either of seals or, more specifically, suppose the idea of the king of the cats, or the fairy hill is on fire. But again, these motifs maybe that find expression time and again, but that trace it back from the local to the international.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's one version of this I found, of this kind of king of the cats, fairy hills on fire type thing.
Okay, wonderful.
In the school's collection. You've probably seen this, I don't know. Once upon a time, a man caught a mermaid, and he took her home and left her on the dresser and fed her every day. One night, some men went out to fish, and they caught a seal. They took it home and threw it on the floor. The mermaid leapt down from the dresser, and she said that was her brother's seal, so he went out crying and was never seen again.
Yes.
It's just this small, a brief account, but it ties in some of those ideas. I haven't really mentioned this, but a lot of these accounts that we're looking at regarding seals, there are many more regarding mermaids.
Yes, many more.
When is a mermaid not a seal? What's the story there?
This is interesting. This is something I think many people would find quite surprising. Anybody who's maybe familiar with the word selkie might know this kind of narrative of a man who sees one woman or maybe more women down by the beach, and their seal skins have been kind of cast aside, left, and he takes one, and then the woman then has to follow him home and says, well, please can I have my skin back so I can return to the sea to be with my seal family, and he kind of refuses, so she marries him and so on and so forth. But in fact, even the word selkie, I haven't come across
in Irish tradition
at all.
You don't find
it appears to be a word used by our neighbours over in Scotland.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And
Murugh
exactly is how we usually refer to the mermaid, which is the figure that we usually see.
What is the mermaid?
So the mermaid is a woman who often might sit on rocks. She'll have the bottom half of a fish tail, and she might be seen combing her hair. She might be seen singing. Yeah.
The otherworld woman image of the combing her hair, kind of. And so this idea of like the half fish, half woman, the classical thing that you know from popular culture, that existed in Irish tradition.
It does.
There's a popular belief there, or accounts thereof, like more so than seal woman in particular.
So many more, yes, yeah.
Right.
It's more popular even than seals. It's why I decided for the thesis to stick to the seal stories. Because,
Yeah.
I would have had too much to deal with.
But that basic narrative, that brings us neatly to that's because we at the start of this we were talking about the different strands of narrative that you find regarding seals or of otherworld belief in general that often start with the anecdotal that then go up this sliding scale that you mentioned. I'm going to steal that and use that forever, up to the level of these more formulaic narratives. And I suppose this one is probably the end of that sliding scale,
Yes.
fair to say.
Yes.
ML 4080, Migratory Legend 4080.
The seal woman.
The seal woman, which you've given a synopsis there, and this idea of a migratory legend is one that migrates naturally from country to country, place to place, and it tells the story of a union between a mortal man and a seal in human form. So there are, like you were saying, many versions that relate to the mermaid, but less that relate to that describe it as a seal.
Exactly. I think
but
single figures.
We have loads of versions of this that we can accounts that we can go through or describe for people. But like you were saying as well, that the basic premise is that this woman has her seal skin cast aside, or sometimes it's described as just like a shawl or a hood and stuff like this.
Yeah, here it's often a cuchel, a hood, or a capping, a cap.
Yeah, right.
Also, I think a cloak as well. Yeah.
And then this guy takes it, and she kind of forgets at times that she's a seal as well, doesn't she? She marries him and has children, but she doesn't remember or something. Does that ever?
I'm sure it does. I'm not as familiar with the.
What's the
mermaid,
general
but-
thing that she knows that she used to be a seal, but she can't. She just is powerless.
Yeah, exactly.
return.
She's kind of trapped, and she can't return without this, whatever this garment is, whether it's a cloak or a tail in some cases as well. But.
And at the end of these, then in each of the instances, she finds the cloak and then abandons her husband and abandons her children.
Often,
she always
yes.
leaves. So it's like it's a narrative of, like, I don't know, a certain type of there's a dark aspect to it, but it's really interesting in that sense that she leaves and returns to the sea.
Yes.
When she reclaims her original form, basically.
Exactly. And almost always, I'm nearly certain, I haven't done a full survey on the mermaid story, but I think she always returns to the sea. There's no question of it.
Yeah,
really.
it's never kind of happily ever after. She's gone.
Exactly.
And this accounts then for some of the unions, or some of the seal people, the families and so on, are said to have been descendants of these unions.
Exactly.
This is a piece from Kerry, 1948. The translation, it says, there was a man in Machara, and he was down at the sea one night looking for seaweed to gather, and he saw a seal, and he caught the seal, and he took the seal home with him alive. When he saw her, she was sitting on a rock as a woman. She had a cloak beside her, and she was combing her hair. He crept up on her when she was combing her hair, and he snatched the cloak and took it with him. Like, he kind of kidnapped her in these instances, essentially,
Often,
and then keeps her prisoner.
yeah.
And she had to follow the cloak, so she came after him to his house. He came inside and threw the cloak in the back of the loft as far as he could. She stayed there with him, and she spent some years there, and they had children. And the children's feet were webbed like the foot of a goose or a duck. There were no spaces between the toes. The toes were stretched out. If what they say is true, and between them was all closed over, up to the very tops. She had a few children by him, and she spent several years there and was very hard working. Anyway, there came one particular day when he had to put oats or something up on the loft. He went up on the loft for the first time in so many years, and he was throwing down old things that were up there. And with all the throwing down, he threw down the cloak. She spotted the cloak, and she got up and grabbed it and put it under her on the chair. He went out then to bring the oats in. When he was gone out, she shook the cloak and hid it. When he was gone out, she took the cloak and hid it. And when it was coming on for evening, she brushed her children's hair. And when it was coming on for evening, she brushed her children's hair and cleaned and tidied them. Then she threw the cloak on herself and made off down the shore. And nobody ever saw her again. It's really, there's something so, I don't know, is it poignant or something strange? That little note at the end, that she kind of brushes their hair and cleans and tidies them, but she leaves.
Yes.
And she never tries to take the children with her.
No.
She's just, that's it, she's gone.
Exactly. And I think this version has an interesting idea that we sometimes see in southern versions, I believe, where it's his own carelessness that reveals the cloak, because he's kind of throwing things everywhere and not really paying attention to what falls where, and that's kind of his own fault, which is It's interesting.
What are the other versions where it's not his carelessness that?
Sometimes it can be the children themselves. It's
Oh
like,
yeah, they're like, oh, did you see Dad doing this with the oats? Like, oh yeah,
exactly.
this cloak.
And she's like,
Yeah. Yes,
her ears
yes.
prick up immediately. She's like, what did you say? Where is it?
That's so cool.
Yes, very interesting.
Yeah, it really is.
It's such a human story. I think.
Yeah.
I always think it's no surprise that this story is just recreated again and again in literature.
Why?
In poetry.
Why do you think it is?
I think it's just because it's just so human. There's so many things that are understandable for anybody. You know,
Kind of like of say difficult, say, a desire to escape relationships or domesticity or feeling trapped or this sort of stuff.
And the idea of power and control, the idea of children, abandoning children.
Yeah, and that is really interesting. But that is, I mean, there are hundreds of versions of this.
Yes, I think over 300.
Apparently,
I do think so.
And then in some instances, there's like you found a really nice piece in the Sound Archive about the Dowd stones that this woman who leaves curses the family.
Yes,
is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So we're returning here to another idea as we had with the seals, that certain families are associated with otherworld beings or the world aquatic beings in this sense. So yeah, this one is about the Dowd family.
This one was collected by Leo Corduff from... Who was this collected from?
I think Patrick Killeen is his name.
Patrick Killeen. So when I first heard this, I just assumed it was a woman, but now, because it was like a high-pitched voice,
yes,
but I think
exactly.
it is a man.
Yeah, I think so too.
This is Leo Corduff, and this piece describes the Dowd stones, which we have photographs of. If you go to duchas.ie and type in Dowd stones, you'll see pictures of them. And this is the mermaid who marries a man, and then she gets is restored to her original form, and she leaves, and she turns her children to stone. The stone
before she leaves, exactly.
As you do.
And yes, those pictures are beautiful. They're taken by Barbara Nealon.
Barbara, yeah, they are lovely, because you have pictures of Barbara with her infant daughter. I forget, I don't know, I'm not sure who, but they're really, really nice photographs. Anyway.
Beautiful.
Were you ever down around Scormore or around there? There's a hotel there, the Scormore Hotel.
No, I've never been there.
Well, there is the Scormore Gut. It runs up by the side of the Moy for about 2 miles. The tide comes in, runs up and runs out again. There's a little river running into it. At the top of that gut, the old Dowds had their fortress.
Yes.
And where the rooms of the fortress is, there are 7 stones in it. 7 big lumps of stone rock. And they're called the Mermaid's Children. And the story is that Dowd got up one morning and went out and found a mermaid asleep on the banks of the Moy, and her Cahill Cowlach, that's her swimming trunks.
Yeah. What do you call it again?
Cahill Cowlach. Some distance away from her, so he took this Cahill Cowlach and refused to give it to her and forced her to stay with him and marry him. It was harvest time, early in harvest time, and they were going to get in all the oats and barley and that sort of thing and stack it. But he got a stacks built, and he put this Cahill Cowlach in a stack of oats and built it up, and every harvest he left one stack there, that stack there, and never moved it until the next harvest, and he'd take the oats from the old stack and put it into a new stack. And eventually they had a family, 7 children, boys and girls. And one harvest they were building the stack, and one of the young lads saw this Cahill Cowlach being put into the stack. And he went to his mother and he told him that he saw Grand and Daddy taking a grand looking thing that was shining out of one stack and putting it into another stack. And when he come out, she said, and show me the stack. So he went out and showed her the stack, and she said nothing about it until she got out Dowd away from home. And she knocked down the stack and took the Cahill Cowlach and went off to sea again. But before she went, she turned the 7 children into 7 stones, and they're called the Mermaid's Children.
And the 7 stones are there?
Yeah.
This is at the gut?
Yeah, at the top of the gut.
Yeah.
Near the hotel. There's a hotel there now.
So amazing. And even that piece there, which is more like deceptive, you know, that the man is taking it from one stack of oats to the next and hiding it. But like you say, it's the children that pointed out to her.
Yes, exactly. It's really interesting, actually. I might mention the article by Blomquist on the Mermaid. Really amazing article, yeah. I think it's fascinating for anybody who's interested into how writers and poets draw on folk tradition. Because he takes 2 poems by Seamus Heaney, and one by Seamus Heaney and one by Nuala Ní Dhomhnaill. And he can pull apart, which is amazing, really. He can pick out all the motifs that they include in their own poems to be able to kind of compare them to the material that we would have here, and what that meant for, you know, what region their inspiration may have come from, and working backwards that way. I think it's really interesting.
Really, it is a fantastic article. Yeah. I'll put a link of readings that's available online through anyone who has JSTOR, because it's published in Béladis, the Journal of the Folklore Writing Society. But it's such a dark and interesting narrative. It's amazing. You have something that you wanted to cover
I wanted to point out just another version. There's, if anybody, while you're looking at the images of the Dowd stones on Duchas, do look for maybe the second name Glavin, or even seal, and then look in Cork, because there's this really wonderful just cluster, I'd say maybe 7 or 8 or maybe 5 or 6 narratives that talk about how a man named Glavin, or O'Glavon, was out, and he meets a mermaid similar to O'Dowd in the story we just heard, but this woman tells him that she will marry him, but she names 3 things that he must not do, and one of them is that he must not kill a seal. But unfortunately he does not listen.
Typical.
Yeah, absolutely. So when the wife sees the seal, the dead seal that he's caught, she kneels down and she kind of takes the seal's paws and she starts lamenting, "Oh, this is my brother seal." And then, as in the story we just heard, she kisses all her 5 children and went back to the place she came from.
So on account of him breaking this taboo.
Yes, exactly. He breaks the rules he gave her.
You didn't have to do one thing.
Yes, one thing.
Useless.
Or sometimes 3 things, but still.
And there's a little cluster of those in Cork.
Yes, exactly. There's more versions like this other places, but I think the Cork version often brings up seals.
Specifically seals.
Specifically
and then
seals,
she leaves when this taboo is broken. It's an amazing topic. There's so much around, like, ideas around, I don't know, facing the natural landscape, control, survival, reality, appearance, the other world, the natural world, the supernatural world. Like, what would you say, enchanted humans or enchanted races of people? There's just such a strange perception rooted in the natural landscape, or these ideas that all is not as it seems, basically, and that I suppose the animals with which we share our time here in the natural landscape are enchanted in their own ways, or that they have more of a connection to us than we might fully realise.
Exactly.
And that our behaviour is often marked by taboos, that there's retribution for a sort of poor treatment or behaviour of the natural landscape or its inhabitants. And likewise, there can be benefits and rewards as well. I want to read, before we finish, just here a note from Barbara D. Lynn, which I think it sums this up nicely. In her article again on this topic that we've been kind of carrying on through. She says, "Mention of metaphor and symbolism brings us conveniently back to the comments made at the beginning of this article regarding the relationship between mankind and the environment. Briefly, it should be said that one of the most important things to realise about Irish seal traditions is that they are ultimately true, or at least that they have a truth of their own, albeit not necessarily in a literal sense. In their own way, the beliefs and stories can be seen to reflect an infinitely more refined and sophisticated understanding of the delicate balance which exists between mankind and the natural environment, and of man's place in the overall scheme of nature than we find in what would usually be regarded as more advanced systems of belief. As such, the legends and beliefs still have much to offer us." I think it's a fantastic point, because it shows this whole, like you said at the start, geographical, etiological, psychological, spiritual understandings of and relations to and around the natural landscape. But we will leave it there, I think. Thanks so much, Alba, for coming in and sharing your research. It's amazing, all the work that you've done. This is available online, isn't it?
It's not yet available online. It will be soon. I really hope so. So
didn't you do a blog post or something for Culture or for Heritage Week or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. You can have a look on the UCD Cultural Heritage blog.
The blog. I'll put a link up. All this will go into the description in the SoundCloud. And there's going to be, you've worked on this, on the content is ready to go, I think. Exactly, a website of all the material you've transcribed, which is amazing, and then you've translated loads of it as well. So there's a huge body of work that you've done, and it's amazing, the stuff that you found. It's really incredible.
I enjoyed it so much. It's really, I mean, you've heard it, but it's interesting stuff. So it was wonderful to work with it. But yeah, exactly. All that material is ready to go, and we want to put it online so you'll be able to kind of use an interactive map to be able to zoom in and look at various stories.
Look forward to that.
Yeah.
Thanks a million, and yes, you shall be dragged on again, kicking and screaming, no doubt, for more discussions of the same. And to everyone out there, hope all is well. We will be back soon, and Idir Shaka Shin, Slán.